Basically, Iran's been on my mind, and so I wanted to have a um, make a video on that. And so I decided to go back to ChatGPT and have a little conversation about this and see where it takes us. So I first start out with how much money is the United States spending on the Iran war? And it replies, if you're referring to the current 2026 US Iran war, the Pentagon's most recent official estimate is that the United States has spent about 37.5 billion so far. That figure includes both money already spent and projected costs through the end of the current fiscal year. Here are some context. So in early March, estimates are around 11 to 13 billion after the first week of the war. Late March estimates had risen to roughly 25 billion. Late July, the Pentagon's estimate is now like 37.5 billion. That number does not include many potential long-term costs, such as veterans' medical care and disability benefits. Replacing military equipment over many years. Interest on money borrowed to finance the war. Broader economic effects such as higher oil prices and inflation. Some analysts argue that when those long-term costs are included, the total eventual cost could be much higher, possibly reaching into the hundreds of billions or even more over time. But those are projections rather than the official government figures. And I go on to ask it, how much more are they asking for? If you mean and so it replies, if you mean how much additional money the Trump administration is asking Congress to approve, the current request is about 87.6 to 88 billion in emergency supplemental funding. This is in addition to the approximately 37.5 billion the Pentagon says has already been spent on the war so far. So in total, already spent 37.5 billion. Additional funding requested about 87.6 to 88 billion. Combined, that's roughly 125 billion. And I go on to ask, where does this money come from? The money doesn't come from a single source. When Congress approves a large war appropriation, it is financed through a combination of federal borrowing, the largest source, in parentheses, largest source. The U.S. Treasury issues Treasury bills, notes, and bonds. These are bought by investors such as pension funds, banks, mutual funds, individuals, the Federal Reserve, and foreign governments. This increases the national debt. Tax revenue. The federal government continues collecting income taxes, payroll taxes, corporate taxes, tariffs, and other taxes. Tariffs. Those revenues help fund overall government spending, including defense, but they generally are not enough by themselves to cover major wars. Reallocation of existing funds. Congress can move money from other programs or use unspent funds, though this usually covers only a small portion of large emergency spending. For recent U.S. wars, including Iraq and Afghanistan, a large share of the costs was financed through borrowing rather than by raising taxes. Economists have noted that borrowing spreads the cost over many years, but also increases interest payments on the national debt. So if Congress approves roughly 125 billion for the Iran war and related military activities, much of that would likely be financed by issuing additional US Treasury debt unless Congress simultaneously raises taxes or cuts spending elsewhere. Who exactly, this is me again, who exactly are they borrowing it from? And ChatGPT says the US government borrows by selling US Treasury securities, Treasury bills, notes, and bonds. The buyers are a wide range of investors, not a single lender. The largest lenders include US investment funds, mutual funds, money market funds, pension funds, banks, and other financial institutions, insurance companies, the Federal Reserve, which holds Treasury securities as part of monetary policy, individual Americans who buy Treasury bonds directly or through investment funds, state and local governments, foreign investors, and governments. The foreign holders only own only a portion of the debt. Among the largest foreign holders are countries like Japan, United Kingdom, and China, though their holdings change over time. As of recent data, about three-quarters of U.S. Treasury debt is held by domestic investors and institutions. About one quarter is held by foreign investors and governments. So if Congress authorized another 125 billion in spending, the Treasury would likely finance much of it by auctioning new Treasury securities. Those securities are purchased by whoever bids successfully, mostly U.S. financial institutions and investors, along with some foreign buyers. The government then pays interest to those bondholders until the securities mature. So, like, two things should be addressed here. So, one is that, like, so as far as like funding for this major war and other major wars, um, they are gonna get, they're gonna have to borrow. It's through selling these bonds, they're borrowing. And so that's the one thing. And the other thing is, it's going to be from people who are going to get something back, the investors. And so, who are these investors? They're American investors. So think about that. And so, um, and also look at the buzzwords. So we have war, destruction, it's against like Iran or any other foreign country. We have war, investors, auctioning, and bids. If you play the scenario out in your mind, doesn't it look like it's just like these big wigs are betting on a war? Like people that like say like a cockfight. When you reduce it down to the bare minimal, you know scenario, is it? I mean, is it just me or is that what you're beginning to see yourself? So I ask this question: What are some domestic investors? I mean, why give all this to these foreign countries? Yeah, we're going to let you invest in all this stuff, and you're going to make bank. What does that leave us? So of course it's going to be domestic investors are going to be the real players here, right? So that's the kind of thing that I wanted to unpack here. Okay, so some of the largest domestic investors in U.S. Treasury securities include money market mutual funds, such as those managed by companies like Vanguard Group, Fidelity Investments, and BlackRock. Pension funds, including state and local government retirement systems such as the California Public Employees Retirement System. Commercial banks, the big ones like Chase, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo. Insurance companies. How many people are having problems with insurance claims? Like home insurance claims and any kind of insurance. how many people are experiencing some kind of like customer complaint, with their insurance? Okay, just throwing out there, insurance companies, insurance, um, which invest premiums in safe assets like treasury bonds, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. The Federal Reserve, which holds trillions of dollars in treasury securities as part of its monetary policy operations. State and local governments, which sometimes invest excess cash in treasuries. Individual Americans who buy treasury bills, notes, bonds, or savings bonds directly through the treasury or indirectly through mutual funds and retirement accounts. And so it kind of pulls us into this. And some of us don't know it. A lot of us don't know it. It's just part of their 401k, I think. Okay, anyways, it's important to note that these institutions buy treasury securities for many reasons, not specifically to finance a particular war. They purchase them because U.S. treasuries are generally considered among the safest and most liquid investments available, etc. So you have faith in the government, and that's why they're doing this too. So you have to have, that. Okay. Why would the banks and Vanguard? This is me again. Okay, I should probably clarify. So I'm now this is me asking a question. Why would the banks and Vanguard or BlackRock keep giving money away like that? What do they get out of it? And okay, I just want to let this um, unfold here. Okay, they aren't giving the money away; they're making an investment. There's a key word there: investment. That's what all this is about. Investing in war. In this case, when an institution like BlackRock, Vanguard Group, or a bank buys a U.S. Treasury bond, they're effectively lending money to the U.S. government in exchange for interest. You see that? Interest. And the government pays a fixed or variable rate of interest over the life of the bond. Repayment of the principal, they got to pay what originally they owe. Uh, a relatively low risk asset. Again, asset. Everything is an asset, um, in our lives, and it's what is worth that's something that's worth money that you can use for investing and making more of the same. That's an asset. You know, you make anything an asset. That you need, and then they'll make it an asset. Coming to a city near you. So here it is, a relatively low risk asset. U.S. Treasury securities are widely viewed as among the safest investments because they are backed by the U.S. government ability to tax and borrow. So that's again faith in the government. Um, for example, if a fund buys 1 billion in Treasury bonds paying 4% annual interest, it receives about 40 million per year in interest, and the bonds mature assuming fixed rate bonds. For banks, treasuries are useful because they earn interest. They're in it for the money, people. Um, can often be sold quickly if the bank needs cash. You see, and that's what a lot of this whole thing is about. Um, help safe help satisfy certain regulatory liquidity requirements. For investment firms like BlackRock and Vanguard, it's slightly different. They usually manage money on behalf of clients rather than investing primarily with the company's own money. If your retirement account, pension, or mutual fund owns treasury bonds, BlackRock or Vanguard may simply be managing those investments for you and millions of other investors. They earn management fees for overseeing those assets. So all this is about money, which doesn't exist. Should probably make a video on that. It's an imaginary thing, and then by moving that around, you can make money on top of that, and so on and so on and so on. It's like an invisible stack of cards, you know? It's like still going to collapse, I think. Anyways, um, so the government gets financing while investors receive interest and an asset that is generally considered relatively safe. It's a transaction intended to benefit both sides, though people may disagree about the government's spending decisions or the amount of debt it takes on. So I'm not going to edit, what might look shine a light on something like the government, like, oh, it's a good thing. I'm just going to try to include everything and let you decide. Um, okay, but this doesn't make this is again this is me. Okay, I'm asking another question, but this doesn't make okay. This is like you know um, coming from well, I don't know. I'm kind of like playing the role of like like I just want to find out, man. I mean, I kind of know some of these answers, but I don't know the details, and so that's why it's kind of funny, you know. So, but here, this is my question. But that doesn't make too much sense because how is the government going to pay all of this money back to those domestic lenders? Which I think is a decent question. That's a question, and sure enough, the reply is that's a question economists and policymakers debate a great deal. The short answer is the US government usually doesn't pay off all of the debt at once. Instead, it continually refinances it. Here's how it works. When a treasury bond matures, the government owes the bondholder the principal rather than saving up all the cash beforehand. The treasury often issues new treasury bonds to raise the money needed to repay the old ones. At the same time, it continues making interest payments using tax revenue and additional borrowing if necessary. This is often called rolling over the debt. So to pay back this stuff, they sell more bonds. That's what rolling over the debt is. And doesn't it sound like like what? That's you got to be kidding me! But that's what they're doing. The system can continue as long as investors remain willing to buy U.S. Treasury securities and believe the U.S. government will continue making its payments. Well, if we didn't have the best military in the world, I mean, I think people would start losing faith in the government. So you see how these things go together? Remember the key words: bidding, investing, shareholders, and war, military. I mean, so how could the one have faith in the other if the other is like, you know, not the biggest, most powerful, advanced military in the world? You see how this is connecting, right? That's why I wanted to make this little video. The risks arise if the national debt grows faster than the economy for a prolonged period. Interest rates rise, making borrowing more expensive. Investors begin demanding much higher interest rates because they perceive greater risk. The United States has carried a national debt continuously since the late 1700s and has refinanced it many times rather than eliminating it entirely. Economists disagree on how much debt is sustainable. Some argue that the U.S. can continue borrowing because of the size of the economy and the dollar's role as the world's primary reserve uh, currency. And you couldn't have like the world's primary reserve currency if you didn't have like the biggest baddest military, right? You see how this is connecting, right? Others warn that rising debt and interest costs could eventually crowd out other government spending or require higher taxes, lower spending, or higher inflation. So your intuition is pointing to a real issue. I got some intuition here. Um, the government doesn't typically pay off the entire debt. It manages it over time by combining tax revenue, economic growth, and issuing new debt to replace maturing debt. Whether that approach is sustainable over the long run is a subject of ongoing debate among economists. Boy, that reminds me of like, you can come up with a story for that. Like somebody's out gambling and they're borrowing money from like, I don't know, shady characters, in this for this fictional scenario, and the collector is like, look, we're gonna break your legs if you don't pay. So the guy is like, well, give me more money, I'll give you more interest. And then like, oh, okay, well, we'll give you more money, but we're gonna take both of your legs, if you don't. And then like, and then so hey, you gotta pay now. Well, and then so this guy's like, going to some other, shady characters and over here and saying, hey, will you loan me some money, you know and then like somehow get this whole, it's like this weird, it's a freaking Ponzi scheme. But you could see like what looks like to me here is like this is like somebody who's an addict, and the addict has to get his fix, so he's going to do anything. He's going to start he's and so my whole idea is that for this like fictional scenario, you could apply it to this, our freaking government and the whole freaking country, and this whole war with Iran and other things, is that like, so imagine an addict is willing to, well, I'll give you my pinky. Okay, now the guy's running around with, 9 fingers. Okay, well, you have two, like 2 thumbs and, 8 fingers. Okay, uh, and one of them's missing. And like, oh well, I'll give you my toe. I'll give you my right big toe. And okay, and then, and so the thing is, what are the fingers and the toes? And then I'll give you my forearm. I'll give you my leg. So now I have this character hopping around because he needs to get his fix. Now now think about this, people. This is why I get into this shit. Who is now what is the finger? What is the toe? What is the forearm? What is the leg? It's you. I'll repeat this. So your intuition is pointing to a real issue. The government doesn't typically pay off the entire debt. It manages it over time by combining tax revenue, economic growth, and issuing new debt to replace maturing debt, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And economists are like debating whether or not this is sustainable. So here I am again with another question. But if they keep refinancing, doesn't that make them more in debt? And again, how does BlackRock and these other and these banks manage anything if they're not getting anything? Refinancing doesn't give them any money. You're asking two separate questions, and they're both important. Remember, I'm not an expert. I'm just like, I want to show that an average person who has like some equipment, like, access to the library, and you got like the internet net, you can ask pertinent questions. And so in asking, sometimes the questions I ask are kind of, you know, ignorant, for lack of a better word. For somebody who is in finance, I guarantee you that, but a lot of us aren't, Um, so like you learn things, and so the reply to that question is you're asking two separate questions, and they're both important. So they're important questions. So first, doesn't refinancing increase the debt? Yes, it can. Suppose the government owns 100 billion in bonds that mature this year. If it doesn't have 100 billion available, it may issue 100 billion in new bonds to pay off the old ones. The total principal stays about the same, but if the government is also running a budget deficit, for example, spending an additional 20 billion beyond its tax revenue, it may issue 120 billion in new bonds. In that case, the total debt increases. So refinancing by itself doesn't necessarily increase the debt, but borrowing additional money does. Okay. Over many years, if deficit continues, the national debt grows. Okay, now, second, how do BlackRock, banks, and others benefit? They do get money. Imagine a pension fund managed by BlackRock buys a 10-year treasury bond worth 1 million with a 4% annual interest rate. Well, that's why they're doing it, folks. Um, every year, the U.S. government pays about 40,000 in interest to the owner of that bond. After 10 years, the government repays the $1 million principal. If the government finances the debt, that doesn't mean the investor loses out. The original bondholder is still paid when the bond matures. The government raises that repayment money by, does anybody know the answer? All right, are you ready? Selling new bonds. Like, here, right? To other investors, or sometimes the same investors buy the new bonds. For BlackRock and Vanguard, most of the money they're investing belongs to their clients, people with retirement accounts, pension funds, etc. Okay, they earn management fees for investing those assets, and their clients receive the interest earned on the treasury securities after expenses. For banks, treasury bonds generate interest income and are also considered highly liquid assets that can be sold or pledged if the bank needs cash. So, from the investor's perspective, they lend money to the government. They receive regular interest payments. They get their principal back in maturity. They may then choose to buy newly issued treasury bonds and repeat the process. The concern you seem to be raising is about the long-term sustainability of the cycle, which is true. This is a real topic of debate. The system depends on investors continuing to believe the U.S. government will keep paying interest and repaying principal. If that confidence were to weaken significantly, borrowing would become more expensive for the government, which is one reason debt levels and deficits are closely watched. I think this is why we're going to war, people. I think that's why we changed, the Department of Defense, the Department of War, and we're getting all like, uh, we're getting a Woody over like these advanced weapons and deploy them, overseas, right? I mean, do you see how all this is coming together? Okay, so here I am. This is me coming back. I'm sorry, I still don't understand. They're refinancing by selling to the same people that they owed in the first place. There's got to be a catch. What's the underlying reason behind all of this? Because isn't the government just printing more money? Your confusion is understandable because there are actually two different systems involved, borrowing and money creation. They're related, but they're not the same thing. Here's a simplified example. One, the government issues a $1,000 treasury bond. Two, a pension fund buys it. Three, 10 years later, the government owes that pension fund $1,000 back, plus it has paid interest along the way. Now the government needs $1,000 to repay the bond. It has several options. Again, remember, you're the finger, you're the hand, you're the left foot, you're the big toe or whatever. Use tax revenue. Cut other spending. On what? Social programs for us. What do you mean cut spending? Let's get rid of education. Let's cut Medicare. I mean, what's going on here? I mean, we'll get into this, right? So use tax revenue, cut other spending. Let's get rid of all the art museums. Let's get rid of all the freaking libraries. What's next, right? How much national endowment for the arts has? You know what I mean? The first thing to go was the arts, and then like Big Bird. Let's get rid of Big Bird. I mean, what? I mean, that's just That's more of a political stunt because the Trump administration, doesn't like DEI and stuff like that. Okay, that's that's basically what that is. Um, okay, wait. They use tax and revenue, cut other spending, issue a new $1,000 bond, which someone buys. The money from that new bond is then used to repay the old bondholder. The old bondholder gets paid. The new bondholder now owes the new debt. So that's like passing the buck as far as I'm concerned. Okay, anyways, how did that sucker buy that other person's debt? So you're just passing the debt down the line, and these people who do that, they walk away with the money. It's interesting, right? I mean, you know, uh, so where does this money come from? Most of the time, it comes from investors' savings, not from printing new money. Okay, like I said, I don't know all this stuff. I'm finding out as we go. But what about printing money? This is where the Federal Reserve enters the picture. The Federal Reserve is the U.S. central bank. At times, especially during financial crisis, it has bought large amounts of Treasury securities. To do that, it creates bank reserves electronically. People often refer to this as printing money, although today it's done digitally, etc., not physically. Um, that is different from the Treasury borrowing from private investors, which, yeah, it's obvious when you think about it. The Treasury itself cannot simply create dollars whenever it wants. Is there a deeper reason? Many economists describe the system as one that works because of confidence, right? I kind of already went over that. Investors believe the US government will continue paying interest. The US government has the power to tax and has historically repaid its debts. The US dollar is the world's primary reserve currency, so Treasury securities are in high demand. Critics of the system argue that it encourages governments to accumulate ever larger debts. Interest payments transfer large amounts of money to bondholders. Heavy reliance on borrowing can become a burden on future taxpayers. So, who are the bondholders and who are the taxpayers? All right? That's what's important here. That's boiling it down to two things. You have these people who are bondholders, and people who are taxpayers. And so I would even like simplify it more and say the investors make all this money and you have the taxpayers paying the bill. Supporters argue that borrowing allows governments to respond to wars, recesses, and emergencies. Treasury securities provide a safe place for savers and institutions to invest. As long as the economy grows, carrying debt can be manageable. So there isn't one universally agreed upon catch. The system is, I kind of showed you the catch, right? So you got to weed through what, Chat GPT and other AI says. You got to really push it. I made a video where I was talking about a given subject and I grilled the AI and it was like, you're absolutely right. And so that for another video. So there isn't one universally agreed upon catch. The system is based on a combination of taxation, borrowing, and investor confidence, and at times central bank actions. The debate is largely about how much debt is too much and when borrowing becomes unsustainable. So here I am with another question. So you're saying ultimately they have to get the money from taxes and they have to cut other spending. So that means you pay more taxes, not billionaires, but average workers, and they're going to cut more on Medicaid and Social Security. Is that what this is leading to? You're identifying one of the central political debates around government debt. The answer is that is one possible outcome, but it's not the only way governments handle debt. The choices are political. Now that you told me the choices are political, I could rest better. I could rest easier at night. That's a load off my chest, man. That's it. Hey, it's political, so never mind. Everyone just go home. When the government borrows money, eventually the cost has to be managed through some combination of one, economic growth. That's another subject. What is economic growth? That sounds like cancer, growth, you know. Uh, I'm sorry, some highly functional capitalists must hate me by now, but um, if the economy grows faster than the debt becomes easier to manage because the government has a larger tax base. Yeah, you and me, which is really weird. They undercut the average worker and they expect us to pay taxes. So it's very, anyways, I don't want to, I get into this ranting mode and I don't want to do that right now. Okay, taxes. The government can raise revenue through taxes. That can come from workers through income payroll taxes, duh, consumers through sales tax where applicable, or higher taxes on corporations and wealthy individuals. Well, maybe that's why it's like I'm interested in like, wow, the price of this is going up and the price of that is going up, like big things like cars and houses and all that. Well, maybe this is why, you know. I mean, one of the reasons why, the multi-tiered reason, right? There's multiple reasons why, but this is one reason why, right? So it's very interesting. You can tax on that. So if houses cost, a gajillion times more than they did back in when they did in the 70s, guess what? You can tax that, right? Okay, so much for affordable housing. Well, it's another subject. I don't want to get you know too distracted here. Okay, so spending cuts. Congress can reduce spending. Programs like Medicaid, Social Security, Medicare, education, infrastructure, or other government services can become targets in budget debates. Defense spending can also be reduced, but although politically it is often protected. Yeah, so I remember certain candidates, like a long time. I remember this guy, Larry Agrin. He was running as a Democrat, um, like in the 70s, and well, no one even knows who the hell he is because one of his main things that he wanted to put on his bill was let's cut military spending. Well, guess what? You're not even going to get into the debates. The Democrats pushed him out, and he was a Democrat. All right, I promise, no ranting, right? Okay, inflation. If the money supply grows too quickly relatively to the economy, inflation can reduce the real value of debt. I think Larry Agrin, I think not the 70s, I think the 80s, or I don't know when. I have to look at that um, about him, but it doesn't matter. So I digress. Um, if the money supply grows, now I'm thinking the 90s, like with Clinton, like when Clinton was president. I think that okay, let's settle and say like some like Larry Yeager in the 90s. Okay, if the money supply grows too quickly relative to the economy, inflation can reduce the real value of debt. However, inflation also reduces purchasing power for everyone, especially people with fixed incomes. Continuing to borrow. The government can keep rolling over debt as long as investors continue buying treasury bonds. The concern you are raising is one critics make. The ordinary workers may end up carrying more of the burden, while wealthy investors and large financial institutions receive interest payments from government debt. And that's what I thought all along. And that's what it said here, right? That's what it said here. All right. So supporters of the current system, well, yeah, those are the supporters of the current system would respond that many Treasury bondholders are actually retirement funds, pension funds, and ordinary people's investment accounts, not just billionaires. Okay, all right. Cutting programs or raising taxes is a political choice, not an automatic result of borrowing. But historically, when governments face pressure to reduce deficits, the political fight often centers around exactly what you mentioned, whether to raise taxes, cut social programs, reduce military spending, which they If you say that, you're not going to get elected. You're not going to get on the ballot, or borrow more. The outcome depends on who has political influence and who prioritizes who and what. I'm sorry. The last one was a confusion. Uh, the outcome depends on who has political influence and what priorities lawmakers choose. Okay, maybe I got to slow down. Another question that I pose. Okay, all right. Is anybody benefiting from the war that we are waging against Iran? So it's kind of like, okay, let's see who's, let's get more specific here. Yes, I mean, if nobody's been okay, here's the thing. I mean, again, so if nobody benefits from a war against Iran or any other war, guess what? We wouldn't have any more wars. So basically, before I made this video, I was like, you know what? The reason why we have a lot of wars is because rich people benefit. I know some people that like, well, I'm like 1.5 million, in my bank account. Like maybe I'm not going after you that much. Okay, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. I'm talking about like, hundreds of millions, like the billionaires and especially the billionaires, where, if nobody is benefiting from these wars, we wouldn't be having them, right? And so here we go. Yes, people are benefiting from the war. If it was no, I wouldn't be making this video. you know. So yes, there are groups that can benefit that can financially benefit from a war. Well, duh. Although that does not necessarily mean those groups cause or support the war. Okay, this is getting interesting here, right? Wars create winners and losers economically. Hold on to that. I think about that. Winners economically. Again, if nobody benefited from the wars economically, we wouldn't be having these freaking wars in the first place. For the US, Iran conflict, the main potential beneficiaries are defense contractors. They're the most obvious beneficiaries. They're the ones that make the weapons and stuff. Lockheed Martin, and like they make the fighter jets and missiles and all these things. Uh, you know, Raytheon. I think Raytheon now is RTX. It says it here. Uh, they make so Lockheed Martin. They make the fighter jets. They make the fighter jets and all that. Okay, and then Raytheon or RTX. They make your missiles and Air Force systems. Northrop Grumman aircraft weapon systems. They seem to be making all the same thing. Boeing military aircraft and systems. So do you notice how our planes are really showing up a lot? And so that's it's just something to know. Defense companies have seen increased demand and larger order backlogs as governments seek to replace weapons used in conflicts. So what good are those weapons if you don't need them? In a peaceful world, imagine all the people, John Lennon, you wouldn't need any of these weapons. But now we see why we need these weapons. Huh? You see how it all goes back to the economics. It's the economy, stupid. Okay, okay. Oil and gas companies. We looked at the manufacturers, the weapons manufacturers, and that. Now the oil and gas companies. Okay, a war involving Iran can disrupt Middle Eastern oil supplies, especially shipping routes like the Strait of Hormuz. Higher oil prices can increase revenue for some producers. Potential beneficiaries are large oil producers, well, the U.S. shale companies and oil trading firms. Energy companies have benefited from price volatility and supply disruptions in the conflict. Investors, there it is. I think it all goes right down to investors because investors are on top of all of this. Everything is to be invested, and the money rolls back right to them, right? So so number three to me is something. Investors and financial markets. That's what all this is for and about, right? Some investors can profit by buying defense stocks before increases, trading oil futures, investing in companies that benefit from higher military spending. So it's like if you have a particular president talking about a particular war and saying in a particular day that he's going to do a particular action against a particular country at a particular time, how's that going to affect Wall Street? And then he does it again and again and again. Somebody's going to benefit from that because it causes the Wall Street, it causes stocks to go up and down. So it's right here. Investors can profit by buying defense stocks before it increases. And that stuff goes up and down based on just what the president says about a particular country with, we're having a particular problem with. So buying defenses stocks before it increases, trading oil futures, investing in companies that benefit from higher military spending. Large asset managers may benefit indirectly because they manage funds that own shares in these countries. Okay. Some workers in local economies. Defense production can create jobs in areas where weapons are manufactured. A factory making missiles or aircraft may expand hiring. Are you making weapons? Am I making weapons? Maybe this is a different kind of a weapon. If you're a writer, remember, there isn't a man in a mansion that an accurate pen can't puncture. Okay? Get writing. Okay, but there are also many economic losers. Taxpayers. The finger, the toe, the hand, the arm, the leg. Taxpayers ultimately finance the spending. That pause was intentional. Let that sink in. So if you're a taxpayer and you're voting for Trump, you better let this fucking sink in for a change and admit that you were wrong for voting for this dumbbell who has rolled back any kind of progress with Iran that we had regarding stifling their capability of making nuclear weapons. And the Strait of Hormuz was open, like a pair of legs spread open for the whole world to go in there and do what they want, right? And then Trump comes in to sit all up, all right? Yeah, I'm ranting now. Think about this, you fucking morons, especially you Italians who voted for him. You fucking macaroni MAGA idiots. I'm ashamed to be Italian because of you. We're voting for this asshole. A lot of Italians voted for this motherfucker. What the fuck is wrong with you people? And I'm literally targeting Italians now. I'm not talking about any other, group of people. I'm ashamed. I am ashamed. And I'm like a nobody. Oh, well, Sergio doesn't have a lot of money. That's the whole fucking point of what we're talking about here. Not about me not having money, but then this here. It's all about money for people. And guess what? You're not going to be a fucking millionaire anytime soon. The government, they only look after number one. All right? And you're not even, you're not even number two, Okay, Frank Zappa there, something like that. Okay. I'm sorry to be getting angry like this, but when you really start compounding this info and you really think about it and how it affects you emotionally, and personally, it's like, you know what, screw it, man. If you can't handle me like raising my voice, because I got a few doozies here, just consume something else, and look at me. You think I'm really concerned about what you think about me, about my appearance and stuff? I mean, yeah, I wash every day and stuff. I brush my teeth every fucking day. If I'm still not appealing to you, then go fuck off, man. I'm sick of this shit. Let's get some stuff rolling, let's get some stuff happening here that benefits a lot more people than the idiots on they must not be idiots because we're the idiots for voting for them. All right, they're not the idiots, we are. So that's why I'm upset because nothing is getting done. It's only getting worse, people. So, anyways, I ain't holding back, you know. So, there are also many economic losers. Taxpayers, consumers can be hurt by higher oil and transportation costs. Money spent on war cannot be spent on other priorities. Money spent on war. Let's make that a song. Anybody here into rapping? Anybody here a songwriter? Money spent on war cannot be spent on other priorities. Money spent on war cannot be spent on anything else. That's it. Money spent on war cannot be spent on anything else. Money spent on war cannot be spent on you. Money spent on war cannot be spent on me. Money spent on war cannot be spent for your dog. Money spent on war cannot be spent for your cat. Money spent on war cannot be spent for your community and its fleas. It can't be spent for any of these. They got us on our knees, begging, making us to beg. Oh, please, please, throw us your scraps from the table. We're on the bottom. Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, thank you, Trump. Like a bunch of sorry dogs. Are you not sorry that you voted for him? Can't you man up and go, you know what? I think I made a mistake. And the bigger problem is not just Trump. I've kind of laid in to some the Democrats, the Democratic Party. I lay into them too. The bigger problem, all right, and that's something that I will always hold to. I'm not just attacking the Republicans and the Trump heads. But right now, this war in Iran is happening because of that, right? So that's why I'm raising my voice and getting upset. Taxpayers are getting screwed up the butt. Consumers are getting screwed up the butt. Money spent on war can't be spent on other priorities. Um, Soldiers, civilians, and affected communities bear the human cost. All right. I mean, if you're a veteran, how if you're a veteran and you're missing a limb, how are you being treated by your government? Come in and say, oh yeah, they give me everything I need. I'm happy as a clam, and I would have done the same thing again if I had to make the choice. I mean, I never fought. I never, I'm not a military person, but I'm just saying. All right, look at this. These are the losers. And who did Trump call losers? You know, I never heard Biden say that about soldiers, but Trump did. And you're voting for him? And you're in the military? He called your kind of loser? What's the matter with you? I'm going to repeat this again without yelling. But there are also many economic losers. Taxpayers, they ultimately finance the spending. Consumers can be hurt by higher oil and transportation costs. But not just that, a bunch of other things, I think. Money spent on war cannot be spent on other priorities. Money spent on war cannot be spent on other things. Cannot be spent on me, cannot be spent on you, cannot be spent on the pooch, the cat, your hat, or your bat. Okay, soldiers, civilians, and affected communities, they bear the human cost. So watch that movie by Oliver Stone. It stars a very young Tom Cruise, born on the 4th of July tonight. Watch that and think about what all this is saying. So the economic pattern is often benefits are concentrated among certain industries and investors, while the costs are spread across the broader population through taxes, debt, inflation, and opportunity costs. That concentration of benefits versus widespread costs is one reason wars are frequently debated. I was hopefully going to say wars are frequently fought, debated from an economic as well as a military perspective. Let's play with this. Let's change that. You know, so the economic pattern is often. Let's just start it like this. Benefits are concentrated among certain industries and investors, while the costs are spread across the broader population through taxes, debt, inflation, and opportunity costs. That concentration of benefits versus widespread costs is one reason wars are frequently fought. It's like, okay, um, And the reason why is because so you have you have the concentration of benefits benefiting these people here, but the cost is being put on the people over here. And these two do not meet. The twain never meet. You think that you're going to wind up over there, but you're going to be escorted back over here. Right? Like, you're in a plane. It's like you want to go first class. Well, no, you paid for you didn't pay for first class. Let's take you. You can't use the bathroom there. You got to use the bathroom here. You can't go. It's kind of like that. You have the people who are benefiting from all this stuff here, and then the rest of us here who have to, you know, um, bear the burden. And some of us here are like, well, yeah, I'm a capitalist. I want to go over here. Well, if you, there's no way you're a capitalist. If you don't have anybody working under you, and if you don't have a huge ass investing portfolio, not apart from your 401k, you don't have. You're not one of those animals. You're feeding those animals your finger, your toe, your hand, your arm, your leg. That's what is, your eye, maybe a part of your brain. That's probably what it is. They're eating our brains. They're eating your brain. That's what it is. That's the whole thing about these zombie movies, It's like you have these people, zombies, and they're all eating each other. It's like, yeah, think about it. You know, what happened to Eat the Rich? The rich are eating because the rich are eating us. Who are the zombies in this picture? You know, us for being so stupid, or them for eating us. They're eating our brains. Okay, be a cooperative little bunny and let me have your brain. Here's another question. Can you name some specific people who benefit from the war that we are waging against Iran, like companies and names of people? Yes, we can identify specific companies and executives whose businesses may benefit financially from a US Iran war. But it is important to separate benefits from increased demand or higher prices from caused or wanted the war. There is no evidence that a company or individual caused the war simply because they profit from it. Defense contractors, most direct beneficiaries. Obviously, I mean, they make the weapons and the systems used in modern conflicts when missiles are fired and so on. When all these things are being used, stocks need to be replaced. New contracts must follow. Lockheed Martin, they make the jets, they make the missiles, um, and precision weapons. They have the name of the CEO. Um, Potential benefit, uh, more demand for missiles, aircraft, and stuff like that. So that creates a demand and a large a large defense backlog. RTX, which is Raytheon. Well, the CEO, so I don't know, so the first guy is like Jim Taiclet, Taiclet. How do you pronounce that? Taiclet. And then the CEO for Raytheon or RTX is Christopher Kallio, Cagliostro, Kallio. Um, and so on. They get their defense backlogs. And the other one, Northrop Grumman, they make their bombs and the drones and all that. And it's Kathy Warden. Oh, a woman. I don't know until I read it. It's like, oh, okay. Potential benefit, increased demand. It's just the same thing as the other two. Boeing, and that's Kelly um, Orthberg. They make military aircraft and stuff like that. So military contracts. That's what it. It's like, yeah, we need more of these things. General Dynamics. They make their submarines and stuff. They make submarines and stuff like that. And that's Phobe, Novakovic. They military procurement increases, and of course, yada yada. Oil and other beneficiaries are oil and energy companies. Because Iran sits near the Strait of Hormuz, conflict can push oil prices higher. Higher prices can increase revenue for all producers and investors. When prices get higher, You pay it, and they make it. They make the bank. It's that simple, people. I want to all these things. It goes down to the most bare, basic, semantics here. That's what's going on. Exxon Mobil CEO is Darren Woods. Potential benefit: higher oil prices can improve margins. Chevron, you have Mike Wirth. Potential benefit: higher crude prices and increased profits. Finally, you say it. Why not say that for across the board? You know, other energy companies and oil exporting nations can also benefit from higher prices. Okay, three. Well, duh. Investors and major shareholders. Well, duh. If number three didn't exist, the stack of cards wouldn't stand. It would blow over, right? I mean, if I'm wrong, you tell me in the comments. You correct me if I'm wrong about that. Investors and major shareholders, people who own stock in these companies can benefit if stock prices and profit rise. Well, duh, once again. Large asset managers such as BlackRock and Vanguard Group. Of course, that's why they're in it. They're in it for the biz. That's their business. That's it. Many hold shares of defense and energy companies through funds they manage. Their clients, retirement funds, institutions, individual investors, may gain or lose depending on market performance. It's one big story. America is one big market. Like I said, we're all like commercials. We're all just a product. That's all. We're just a bunch of furniture that these other people move around. Oh, it's time for redecorating. Let's have another war. That's what all this is. That's how I see it. I'm an artist. I'm a visual artist. That's why I see these things. Also, political influence and the defense industry ecosystem. There is also a broader system, sometimes called the military-industrial complex. Finally, that word comes up, right? A relationship between the Pentagon, defense contractors, lawyers, lobbyists, and communities that depend on military manufacturing. The argument made by critics is that companies with billions of dollars in government contracts have an economic incentive for high defense spending. Well, again, duh. Supporters argue these companies provide necessary national security capabilities. Again, I think it's just like you got to have this military in place and you got to have these wars to keep this cash cow flowing. So you cause confusion, you get people angry, and then, hey, guess what? They might build a nuclear weapon. I mean, the stuff that we did to Iran going back to the 50s, so they might they might be angry, I mean, if you get like a bee's nest, use a hornet's nest, you shake it up, this is to get stung, right? And so, hey, well, we have to have a bigger, we have to have flamethrowers, to kill those bees or hornets. That's basically what's going on here, And so the whole business is not about the bees or the hornets; it's about the flamethrowers and everybody making money off all of that, and that's what fuels the economy. Wow, that's a trip, man. Um, so if you are asking who gets money flowing towards them when a war happens, the clearest answers are Lockheed Martin. And then you have the name, the Jim T, RTX, Christopher C, Northrop Grumman, Kathy W, and Boeing, Kelly O, and General Dynamics, Phobe N, and ExxonMobil, Darren Woods, and Chevron, Mike W. They're shareholders and investment funds that own pieces of their, like TEIR, like their shareholders and investment funds that own pieces of these companies. Okay, there it is. They have shareholders, and you know investors. That's all it's about. The investors. Okay, your life you live. The reason why you are alive, people, right now, you're everything you do because you have needs. You got needs. I got needs, Mr. Leahy. Yeah, you got needs. Do you go every time you fulfill a need? You're benefiting the shareholder, a shareholder somewhere out there. It doesn't matter what your need is. Your life is just for the sake of these shareholders. That's why you're living your life. Oh, no. Well, yes, it is. Yes, it is. And you're going to defend it. Remember, he won twice. The bigger question, whether these financial incentives influences foreign policy decisions, is a subject of major political debate. And I go back, I'm looking for people who are made rich because of the war, investors, names of investors, and would these investors be billionaires? It's kind of like a repeat question on my part. We already got some names, but let's just continue. If you're asking which specific wealthy people could become richer because of the Iran war through investments, the answer is mostly major shareholders, whether it is, I mean, we can look up names some other time, major shareholders, executives, and investment fund owners, rather than someone receiving a direct war paycheck. Well, of course. If you're receiving a direct war paycheck, you're making like peanuts in that industry, especially if you're a soldier. It's the major shareholders, executives, and investment fund owners. That's what all now think about it. That's why you soldiers are fighting these wars. You're fighting the wars for the benefit of major shareholders, executives, and investment fund owners, while you receive a measly little direct war paycheck and you lose a limb on your way out. Okay? There it is. And you voted for this guy twice because you don't like a woman being president who has skin darker than yours. What the fuck is the matter with you? The important distinction, we cannot say these people caused or wanted the war, but we can identify people whose companies or investments may rise in value when military spending, weapons orders, or oil prices increase. That's not. It's funny, right? Right? I'm sorry. To me, it's funny how it's phrased. Defense industry executives and major shareholders. Again, Lockheed Martin and GMT and blah blah blah. And they talk about the things. So now they're repeating the same people that I had already gotten before. So we don't have to go over them. So you have Lockheed Martin, you have Raytheon or RTX, blah blah. You have North Grumman and okay. So and they talk about major stock shareholders also making a lot of money off that. So we already know that. So it's kind of like okay. I digress. Okay, are these people billionaires? Some are not. Yeah, but if you're not, you're pretty much going to become one next year. So some are, some not. So you have the company CEOs of defense contractors are generally very wealthy, a lot richer than you who voted for Trump twice. Thank you very much. Often worth tens of hundreds of millions of dollars. And you're worried about, what you're worried about, which is not receiving tens of hundreds of millions of dollars. You know, when's the last time you played golf? All right, but not always billionaires. They're not always billionaires. So the bigger billionaire beneficiaries are usually people who own large stakes in companies or manage enormous investment funds. So here we go. Larry Fink. These are the ones I want to get into. Larry Fink. BlackRock manages trillions of dollars. BlackRock owns shares in many defense companies through its funds. If defense stocks rise, some BlackRock funds may rise in value, benefiting the investors who own those funds and generating management fees for BlackRock. Vladimir Tenev and other financial executives. Wealthy financial executives can benefit indirectly from market activity, although there is no evidence they specifically profited from the war. Okay, okay, fair is fair, I guess. Oil executives and investors. If conflict pushes oil prices higher, some oil companies may benefit. Examples: ExxonMobil, and the CEO for that is Darren Woods. Chevron CEO Mike Wirth. Blah 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 blah. We already know that. Higher oil prices can increase profits for producers and can raise the value of shares owned by wealthy investors. The biggest financial beneficiaries are often not individual billionaires, but institutional investors, mutual funds, pension funds, private equity firms, defense company executives, large shareholders. A key point: if the U.S. spends 125 billion dollars on a war, that money does not simply disappear. It flows. The spice must flow. The spice must flow. I think spice in Dune is pretty much just you know this. It's money. It's monies. That's what it is. And when people get high off it, they're like, like, you know, okay. Anyways, right? It's like that's what Dune is, right? It is. What is that? From Dune, it's like it is by will alone I set my mind in motion. It is by the juice of Safu. The thoughts acquire speed, lips acquire stains. The stains become a warning. It is by will alone that I set my mind in motion. So, that's how that's how I see it. And I'm pretty sure Frank Herbert, had a similar, you know, idea in mind. Okay, the debate is whether that flow of money represents necessary national defense spending or whether it creates incentives for prolonged military spending. All right. Okay, if you want, I can also break down the top 20 richest individual families who have financial exposure to U.S. defense and weapons companies. I should have said yeah, please, but instead I came back with this question. I never said that they caused the war, which I didn't, right? You said that. Thank you for your cooperation. So to me, I think I found like a type of it's kind of like a Freudian slip that this AI had committed. I don't think I ever said in any of the, I mean, I've been saying, like, I've been walking around thinking that, but, and stuff, but I never, for this particular conversation with this chat GPT, I never said that chat GPT AI thing. I never said that. So again, I never said that they caused the war. You said that. Thank you for your cooperation. Okay. You're right to point that out. I like it when you're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm a moron. You asked who benefits financially from the war, not who caused it or wanted it. Yeah, I added that. Just now it's gonna like, oh well, I added that distinction because discussions about war profiting often gets mixed up with questions of responsibility. But it was not something that you claimed. The narrow question is who can become richer because money flows into defense contracts, energy markets, or related investments during a war. So this is a politically corrected way of saying it. And now Democrats and Republicans all do this. Everybody's doing this. This is the corporate. This is how corporations speak. This is if you talk to somebody, you can go to like a LA Fitness and you talk to like a sales rep. They sound just like fucking this. Same with EOS and that. All these companies, the employees, the managers, they all sound like this. What the fuck is this? It's the same thing as what I just said, basically. Just you don't want to. Anyways, I already swore and yelled, and so sorry. Uh, the cat's out of the bag, meow. The answer includes defense community company executives through salaries, bonuses, and stock holdings. When's the last time you got a big bonus at your job? A big one. Okay, large shareholders of defense companies, investment firms and their clients who own defense stocks, oil company executives and investors if energy prices rise, private equity firms that own defense suppliers. Some specific wealthy people with exposure include Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock. Okay, so like BlackRock manages trillions of dollars and ties funds, holds shares in many defense companies. His wealth is tied to the growth of the company and its assets under management. The Vanguard executive In shareholders group, Vanguard Group is a major holder of defense stocks through its index funds. Vanguard itself is not publicly traded, so there are no outside shareholders like a normal corporation. But it said here Vanguard is a major holder of defense stocks through its investment funds. Okay, Jim T, the CEO of Lockheed Martin, and the Christopher CEO, the Christopher C of RTX, and you have the CEO of the other two military, you have like Northrop Grumman. Oh yeah, and then of ExxonMobil. Okay, some of these individuals are very wealthy, but most are not among the world's billionaires class. They will be next week. The larger billionaire level beneficiaries are usually the owners of major investment firms. The owners. Um, so that's a question. Like, who owns BlackRock? If Larry Fink is the CEO of BlackRock, who owns it? A bunch of people, or one? I don't know. So again, these this is like a rabbit hole that Okay, where's that going to lead us to another discussion some other time? So because it says here, some of the individuals are very wealthy, but most are not among the world's billionaire class. The large billionaire level beneficiaries are usually the owners of major investment firms, large shareholders, hedge fund managers, and founders of companies with significant holdings. Um, the flow is basically here's the flow, and this is pretty much the conclusion of my little um, excursion today. The flow is basically this: war spending, government contracts, defense, the war spending, and then the arrow points to government contracts. And then so it's war spending to government contracts to defense companies, to executives, shareholders, investors, increase wealth if stock prices and profits rise. That is the economic mechanism you're asking about. And it pretty much sums it up as how this war in Iran it's pretty much a money making machine. And I don't think like you're the average, workhorse, you know. I don't think this includes you. You're not part of that club.